Hello, bonjour, and ahoy. I'm Roger Hilton, Defense and Security Research Fellow at GLOBSEC, coming to you from Vienna, Austria. For as long as the internet has been around, cybersecurity experts have warned about the threat of a cyber Pearl Harbor-like attack. While Pearl Harbor remains a day that lives in infamy, the recent SolarWinds attack might be a nightmare that never ends. Beginning in March of 2020, it is estimated that 250 federal agencies and private businesses were compromised by federal agents, with the total assessment of the damage still yet to be determined. With me today to provide a battle damage assessment report is Chris Painter. Chris is a president of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise Foundation and a top former cyber US diplomat. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Chris, we have a lot to get to, so let's get right into it. Based on your professional assessment, can you outline both the immediate impacts of the SolarWinds attacks and what are some of the long-term residual impacts, both for American and for transatlantic security policy?
So let me start by trying to characterize this incident. We are still in the discovery phase on this. There's a lot of investigation being done. And what it looks like right now is a very sophisticated and widespread campaign of espionage. Now, that's serious in itself, but it could be far more serious if this was what they call pre-positioning of getting into networks with later intent to cause some kind of damage or disruption. So just as espionage, it's serious because of the amount of data, a number of different issues, including intelligence issues, but also, as we saw back in 2016, weaponizing data for manipulation operations and influence operations. So just because it's even just plain espionage, that makes it still very serious. It is very wide. I'd say there's another thing that distinguishes this from what we normally see with espionage, and that's how widespread it is, how many parties were affected, that it not only affected many different agencies of the U.S. government, but also of some foreign governments, but also, as you mentioned, lots of different businesses. And the vector this worked on, which was through a supply chain and updating channel, which could also have second or third order consequences. So, we're still figuring out how serious this is, but it is quite serious, broad, and important, even if this is just intelligence gathering, which of course every country does, but maybe not on this scale or type.
Yeah, there's been a lot of assessment in the public realm about how it is that they went out there and it was more signaling than other than that. But that's a great segue to the next point. January 20th, the Biden administration takes office, and I think suffice to say, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, is going to have a lot on his plate. When he convenes his first NSC meeting with principals, how would you counsel him on the question of retaliation?
Well, first of all, I'd say Jake is no stranger to these issues. I think one of the real benefits of the incoming Biden administration is that a lot of the top players and cabinet officials, including Jake, including Tony Blinken, Dorcas at DHS, the head of DNI and others.
Ms. Lieberman taking over, yeah.
Yeah, all those folks really do understand this issue and have dealt with this issue back when they were in the White House or in different positions before. So I think that's really, really important. They're not coming into this cold. And I also think we have to, as I've said, if this is just espionage, that somewhat limits your response capabilities. If it's an act of war, which this isn't, or doesn't appear to be, if this is disruptive activity, that would be even more serious. But that doesn't mean you just need to sit on your hands. Even in a physical context, if you catch someone doing espionage, you can arrest them. You can PNG diplomats to show your displeasure with the other country. You can do trade and other kinds of sanctions. There's a lot of activity that you can do with respect to Russia, which this appears to be. And so my counsel would be, and frankly, I think, given the statement the Biden administration has already put out in the statement on this issue, where they said it was very important that we take this seriously and we react and there be consequences, I would say there has to be some consequences for this activity. We have to show that we don't like what was done, and we wanted to try to deter that from happening in the future. Now, you're never going to be able to deter espionage completely. That's happened since the beginning of time. But again, it doesn't mean you need to sit still for it.
To a certain level, Chris, I think you have to applaud the creativity if it was from Russia. With so much of the resources of the government protecting the elections, it seems as they really had a vulnerability that exploited with these watering hole attacks. So, that's great counsel for Jake, and it'll be interesting to see what his outcome is at the end of it.
Well, it's not clear to me. That's been some of the narrative, that all the resources were focused on election interference. But, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I don't think that really excuses not seeing this even though it was very sophisticated. And I think the Russians and other adversaries can also walk and chew gum at the same time. They can use different services to do different things, do different kinds of disruption operations and intelligence gathering operations. So I'm not sure I completely buy into that narrative of where our attention was elsewhere.
Well, I mean, I don't want to be in that meeting with you and Jake Sullivan if that's how you're going to lead it off. Chris, my last question for you is, basically Russia has demonstrated a past pattern of this type of attack versus the United States. And I think we can assume that an attack of this level of sophistication will occur again. If it's not from Russia, it will occur from some other country or another malignant actor. My question to you is, FireEye, the private company, was one of the first companies that identified this. In addition to the government protecting networks, what is the role in private sector in limiting the destruction of these types of events?
So first, just to step back, I'm very careful about language. I wouldn't say this was an attack, at least the way we do it now. This was an intrusion and theft of information. It could have been, and it could rise to the level of attack depending on what we see in the future, but that's not what we see right now. And it's important to think of those things differently. I do think it's significant the private sector. First of all, the private sector clearly is a victim here, and they're also the vector for the attack. I mean, going after private sector companies as the vector to get into these systems, and also the kind of updating systems which most people trust. I mean, you want people to trust updating systems because that keeps things secure, and if they can't trust, that creates a lot of problems and uncertainty. The other thing I'd say is, yes, the private sector has a role in discovering these things. I mean, they should be looking at their networks, particularly if their networks are being used as a means for nation state adversaries to get in. They should be looking at that for their own benefit, to making sure that they're not being taken advantage of. And you're right, FireEye discovered this, but even then, by the time FireEye discovered this, and I applaud them becoming being very transparent about it, or coming out and saying that they've been had. A lot of their tools have been taken. So it wasn't like they discovered it before it happened, or stopped it from happening. And that's a wake-up call, too. That means we have to do a lot better job on defense. Now, everyone always says defense is much harder than offense, that, you only have to go after a particular thing with effort and skill, to defend everything. But I think we do have to do a better job on defense. What we have to do is do a better job in resourcing and doing defense in the government and the private sector. And then the government, I think, has to make sure that we're acting in response to malicious activity, whatever it is. I'd say that over the last several years, we have not been good at imposing consequences on bad actors.
Well said.
Or real attacks either. I mean, for things like the NotPetya worm and others, we haven't really been good at showing that that's something we don't want to happen. So we really have to work on that.
Well, I mean, Chris, I think the big takeaway for me is be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, the old adage. And I think more importantly, a lot of work left to do for the outgoing Trump administration and the Biden administration. So,
yeah. And again, I'd say I'm heartened of the people that have been chosen for the Biden administration so far. I'm certainly heartened by the statement that was put out. That I think the key thing in the Biden statement from, I guess, about a week and a half ago now, your time seems to move so slowly these days, or quickly another way. Is that the statement that cybersecurity will be a top priority at all levels of my administration. That was a pretty significant statement. One thing I've said for years is we need to mainstream this issue and not treat it as a boutique issue. We need to treat it as a real national security issue, and I think that will happen.
Well, I mean, Chris, on that note, let's just hope that the update to the Biden administration isn't compromised. Then we look forward to hearing you in the past. So thanks for joining us again, and have a great start to 2021.
Thanks, you too.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.